Good morning. I am thankful for the opportunity to be present with you in this way this morning and just want to express my regrets for not being able to be present for this Pan African Women's Consultation today. I would also like to thank the Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker Smith, a friend and colleague, for her part in planning this consultation, for her tireless engagement against hunger and poverty, and for her commitments to eradicating racism globally. As a person of African descent, I am keenly aware that the plight of the millions of descendants of Africans brought into the Americas as a result of the transatlantic slave trade is tied to that of millions of African people living on the African continent and in other parts of the world. Our communities are facing many challenges at the intersection of race and gender. These relate to a myriad of issues, including poverty and hunger. Women and girls represent half of the poor in developing regions and slightly more than half in developed regions. There is a higher level of poverty for all female headed households compared to male headed households in developing regions. Many women are excluded from economic decision making within their own households in developing regions, even if they have a job and a cash income. This does not necessarily mean that they have any control or input into the economic resources that are acquired in their households. In 17 out of 27 developed countries with data, poverty rates are more than 3 times higher for children in lone mother households than in two parent families. As Pan African women, we are disproportionately affected by hunger and poverty. As caretakers of family and earth and of ourselves, ours is not a passive engagement as voyeurs to the world's problems and to the challenges that are facing our communities. Instead, we are called to take action and to ensure that the cycles of poverty, hunger, HIV/AIDS, homelessness, violence, lack of education, and lack of access to health care are not present for generations of women and children to come. Our women and children need change, and we need it now. We must employ a collective and collaborative strategy that will be of benefit to us in the years to come. The fight for access is a fight that must look comprehensively at the common history of Africa and African diaspora and the legacy of colonization that continues in the presence of multinational corporations that continue to extract resources from the land for profits that continue to be unrealized by the countries and communities that are exploited. We must be willing to continue to name the transatlantic slave trade and the entangled web of issues emanating from this exploitation of Africa and African people as a systemic cause of the current crises facing Africa and African descendant communities globally. We must be willing to exercise our agency in advocating for the human rights and dignity of African and African descendant people globally, and we must be willing to continue the fight for restorative justice, including reparations, for the atrocities committed during the 400 years plus of enslavement of African peoples, the resulting periods of colonization post emancipation, for the unjust laws and legislative actions like Jim Crow and apartheid, and for the ongoing brutalization of men, women, and children of Africa. Whether diaspora or continent born, we are Africans. Whether diaspora or continent born, we continue to suffer through and from the plight caused by hunger and poverty. The UN International Decade for People of African Descent is 2015 to 2024. The decade provides a unique opportunity to address the issues in a way that focuses on the intersectionality of all all the issues that pertain to African descendant people and to their interconnectedness to the African continent and to peoples globally. In declaring the decade, the UN identifies over 200 million people of African descent in the Americas. Our presence in the Americas is a result of the transatlantic slave trade and points to the depletion and draining of resources from the continent. The themes of the decade are recognition, justice, and development. Within these themes is the possibility of addressing the challenges that are facing our communities, and in particular, the millions of men, women, and children who are going hungry. Our call for justice and advocacy can no longer be isolated to the specific countries to which we come from. Instead, we must find our way to being engaged globally as women of faith, joining hands and heart across the globe to declare that we will be heard. We will bring with us our stories and call each other's names. We will ensure that no woman or child goes hungry. We will ensure that poverty and hunger are eradicated. We will declare that we are made in the image of God as we dismantle the barriers presented by racism and xenophobia. We will dismantle the manifestations of colonialism in all forms, utilizing models that will produce sustainable economic development and exercise agency for the outcomes that we desire for our communities. We will not stand in the shadows and wait for others to determine our destiny. Poverty and hunger are decimating our communities and decreasing the life course and life force for millions globally. The targets for the strategic development goals must be held within the international decade. We can eradicate poverty. We can reduce at least half number of individuals living in poverty globally by the target date of 2030. The church must be present for this to happen. The commitment and engagement of African and African descendant women of faith must continue to be present on the forefront of these issues. We are called to be the hands and feet of God, present in the world on behalf of those whose lives are adversely affected by injustice. May we find our way to being courageous in the fight for justice and equality. Thank you.